I think
Yes.
last Friday you posted about the LLM outputs. They look fine on paper, but it can't be defended on audit. So walk me through what's actually
Right.
missing in these LLM outputs.
So because an LLM output in its native form is open loop and it's working on a general knowledge base, you're going to have to check every output. So you can create, so the output of an LLM, if you copy it and use it as a regulatory document, you are still responsible for that. And the issue is if it's based on general knowledge, which is not subject matter expertise, because LLM is a probabilistic tool. It generates sentences based on the probability that the next word makes the most sense given the structure of the language build-up, right?
Right.
So it's not, it's just a it's just a mathematical algorithm at the end of the day that's building sentences and feeding us sentences. There is no knowledge there, right? So that is the problem with LLMs as an open system. But if we close that system, which we normally do as humans, right? We read something, we say, oh, that's not right, or how about this? And we put a new input in. What we are doing is we're closing the loop, what we would call human augmented AI.
Right.
So if you take that further and you close that loop, first of all, you close the loop internally so you get the LLM or the AI system to check itself. That's the first thing. And then you create an independent system for checking the output. For instance, if I'm creating an automatically a batch summary report from a production
Mm-hmm.
environment and I want to automatically create the report, then the natural confirmation would be check this document for all the numbers are in the right spaces. So you receive the inputs, the LLM or the AI system checks all those inputs, looks for trends and everything else that it needs to. Basically, you don't need an AI to take numbers and put them in the right places in a document, but you need an AI to intelligently interpret the information it's receiving and give information that the user needs to know. For instance, is there a trend here that from the last information that is a possible hazard in the future? Should I be aware of that? Do I need to do a job? So if I can independently check the output of my document without AI and without being a human being, if I can have a program that does that, and that program could be created using AI, then I now have an independent verification of my output from my AI system. And I can use that independent verification if there's an error to give an input back to the AI system and say, look, I found this error, please correct it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I create a closed loop system. I create what we call human in the loop, and we all know that humans are not infallible.
Right. I think it ties back to the thing that we spoke about earlier about add guardrails to the entire system. I think that's
Yes,
yeah, that's
yes,
the most important part
yes,
if you're using AI.
yes,
Also,
yes.
if I may ask Martin, what is the differentiator where if you receive an LLM output, what's the differentiator where you can put your name on it or you can sign on it? What makes the difference there?
When it's my document. So this is one of the things about that many companies actually make this error. A a regulatory submission is not a single document. It's about, let's say, 100 to 150 documents. And the story, what you're doing in a submission, you're trying to tell a story to answer two questions. You're trying to say, my product is safe and my product does what I claim it does. And those are the two questions anywhere in the world. what that you're trying to answer when you do a regulatory submission. And what companies forget is that, and it gets very difficult because we're very siloed organizations with lots of experts in different areas. It's very important that the story connects through all the documents. So it's very important that a biocompatibility expert report connects to, for instance, my intended use, to my user needs, to my design input requirements, to my verification and validation, and not just in the trace matrix. So this golden thread of the narrative, people must not underestimate. So when I'm using AI to help me create documents, yes, I'll get it to help me create some text. And I will generate that text more quickly. And I will change some of that text. Sometimes the text doesn't look anything like what came out of the AI afterwards. And sometimes it looks very similar. There are certain things we're very familiar with the dashes that you get for pause marks
Right, from Claude.
in which replaces a comma in AI output. But also AI likes to use the word critical. And it also likes to do a thing called contextual phrasing. Contextual phrasing is it's not because of this, it's because of that. Well, when I'm creating a document, I don't need that comparison. I need, this is why we are doing it this way. I don't need to write, we don't need to do it this way, we're going to do it this way, the other way. There's no point. So the LLMs really like to generate this contextual phrasing. And at the prompt level and the agent level, it's very, very difficult to switch that contextual phrasing off. It's getting better, but it's very difficult to completely get rid
Get
of
rid of
it.
it. There's this joke running around in the software community. One person, he just texts Claude Opus 4.7 that I've got a car and I have to wash it, and the car wash is I think 4 5 meters away from me. So should I walk or should I take the car with me? And Opus goes, no, no, no. Why to your car is just a few meters ahead. You can walk there, and it went viral on Reddit and Twitter. So
Yes.
so it still has to get better and better at it. Martin,
Yes, yes.
have you ever seen a case where the AI generated output, it cleared the internal sort of checks, but then it started failing down the line?
Oh, there's a very, very well known case with the FDA, with the FDA ELISA AI, where the FDA wrote to a pharmaceutical company and asked for the clinical trial data of a clinical trial that did not exist.
Wow.
It wasn't even submitted, but their AI system was saying that there's insufficient documentation about this clinical trial. So that's
Wow.
a classical case of hallucination. The AI system was hallucinating about, and that's pretty obvious then. So what were they using there? They either didn't have the guardrails high enough. I suspect they were using fairly simple agents. And it was because of the simple agent. So if we look at what we do is we learn how to do structured prompts. And then the next thing we do is we learn how to build our own agent. We don't build skills, we build our own agent.
Agents.
And I suspect at this time the FDA had probably built some of their agents for screening very specific documents, and there were the guardrails were not sufficient. And I would imagine now that the FDA are using AI skills to really streamline review and documentation.
I mean, it's shocking. FDA's own AI, it's quoting something which doesn't exist at all.
Exactly, exactly.
Wow.
But the key thing is the system worked, right? It made a request. The company didn't provide it. The company pushed back, so the system worked, and that's the key. The key is that we must make sure that we have systems in place that ensure that we don't have the risk of something getting through that shouldn't.
Is
You know,
just
basically, this is why we have a thing called a process FMEA when we go into the production environment. The process FMEA is all about detecting a possible failure and preventing it from getting out of the factory. It's okay to have failures as long as you can detect them. And a failure that doesn't get detected before you release a product into the market, this is a problem.
wow. I think I was reading recently. There was a stat that came up. I think it was either October or February. 24 children they died due to a cough syrup. One of the ingredients, it
Yes,
wasn't. I think it was in excess or some issue with that ingredient, and 24 children
yes,
passed away. And it really, you dial down to how important compliance actually is when it comes to these things.
yes.
So that exact stat, it made me go deeper and deeper into this entire industry.
If we look at the International Council for Harmonization, the ICH, for pharmaceuticals, if we go back in the history and why that exists, that is also exists because of the whole issue decades ago of the thalidomide drug problem. And so we have to understand that, for instance, the whole issue with the breast implant, where someone was using industrial silicon, and that resulted in a new MDR and IVDR in Europe, a catastrophic situation that harms people. It's a nature of society that only then do people act. People only act after the disaster, and they don't act before the disaster occurs. And that's a very interesting thing when we talk about vigilance. So, vigilance is about acting on an occurrence of a harm, whereas surveillance is acting on the possible occurrence of a harm. Now, what's very interesting with medical devices in the USA, if you had an occurrence which resulted in no harm, but it could, if it went, it could in another situation result in harm, you are obligated to report it. The law requires you to report it. So this is always the issue, the difference between vigilance reporting between devices and pharmaceuticals in the US is devices, you are required to report when the risk profile of your device has changed.
Right.
Because an incident that occurred that caused no harm, the risk profile of your device has actually changed.
Right. Dialing back to that, what is the actual workflow? Like, for example, let's say a pharma or a medtech industry, a company hires you for the regulatory submission. From day one, what does the workflow look like? What are the different phases of it?
Oh, typically, if someone calls me, they're in trouble. if someone if someone calls me, they need help. So initially, I mean the way my workflow with a client, I'll describe my workflow with a client. That's probably the easiest. So someone will call me and they're looking for more resources, they're looking for help. And the first thing is to understand what their help is, what they're looking for. Well, we've had this letter, or we have a problem with a notified body, we don't know what to do, or we don't know how to respond. So it's like, let's look at the information. Or you'll get a company come and say, we have a problem with our risk management. I said, good, show me your risk management. So the issue is when you look at something and you identify the problem that a company has identified as their problem, they may not have identified what their root cause is. And their root cause may go back to the very beginning. What's very common is companies get very enthusiastic about their development. They develop something, and they take shortcuts. And the result is they say, at the end, they say, oh, we can fix all this. We can do our risk management. We can do this and that. And they create these fantastic documents. But there are gaps. There are gaps. And those gaps are the gaps that trip companies up. So this is where AI can really help us. If you create AI tools that can check your documents and say, is everything there? Do I really tell this story that something's complete and correct? For instance, let's think about a device that you reuse at home. So it's a reusable device. What does that tell me? It has to be cleaned. Yeah, you can clean it with detergent. Great. So did you validate the cleaning? No. Why not? It's like, it was obvious. But it's like you claim you can clean something with detergent, but you didn't give the evidence to show that you do actually clean it with detergent.
Right.
And that is the point. That it's, if you make a claim, you have to provide the evidence
Evidence.
that supports that claim. That's all it is. It's everything is claims supporting evidence that I've supported. If I say there's a risk here, but I've mitigated it through this action, then provide the verification and validation evidence that that risk is mitigated. It's all about that's really, so how do you do this? You always look at the, for me, you always look at the big picture. So you always say, well, where are we? What does the company have so far? What do we want to work with? The classical, if we look at the classical design controls from 1996, which has recently been upgraded with the QMSR, but the basic design controls has not changed. And it follows a rule that you begin and you work sequentially through to the end. And I've seen people say, well, Agile, you don't do this. Yes, you do this with Agile. It's just you have a different project management methodology, but nothing's changed. So basically, you specify what you need. You make a claim, at your top level claim. You say, what does my product have to do? With your drug, it's usually a thing called a target product profile. With a medical device, it's an intended use. And then there are indications for use. Why do you have it? Why do you have the indication? What are the indications for your drug product? And these things, these are the very essence. I'm going to build something that does this. So the next step is to say, well, in order to do that, I need my user needs. I need to say from the user perspective, from the user voice, what does the user need? A patient needs to know what is in the packet. So that means he needs to be able to read the packet and interpret it correctly. He needs to store the packet correctly so the contents do not deteriorate. So he needs that information on the packet. That's labeling. So, and the packaging needs to be correct for the situation that you're in. If it's a sterile product, it needs to keep it sterile. So you have your user needs. The user needs a sterile product. And then we have our detailed specification. In software, that can be your software requirements specification. In mechanical requirements, it can be, we can call them design input requirements. They are atomic. They are single lines that says the software has a user interface. It could be as simple as that on a screen of 180 by 1080 or by 1920 or whatever. It gives you it becomes an atomic, measurable point. So all design input requirements are measurable. And if you put design input requirements together and you mix them, they're no longer atomic and you can no longer test them individually, which means your product is no longer testable.
Wow.
So then you go to your next step and you create your design outputs. Your design output could be your software mock-up. It could be your first prototype. It could, but it's all the drawings and all of the documentation to produce the product.
Mm-hmm.
And based on those design outputs, you say, stop, freeze. We are now going to verify it. We're going to test that the device or the product does technically what it's designed to do. And then we're going to validate it. And when we validate it, we say that it does what the user needs. And if those two things don't match, then there's a problem. Then you're going to have to go back to the beginning.
Damn.
And at the end, you create a trace matrix where you connect all your results with all your inputs. That's it.
Wow. That's a lot of documents. You've mentioned a lot of documents in like the entire workflow. Which
Yes.
ones do you think carry like the most weight? Like which makes things much more easier down the line? But if not handled correctly, they can deteriorate the entire, system and they sink the entire submission.
So your intended use document is probably the one and most important document in your whole data set. Because the intended use statement determines the scope of your product. It determines your risk management. It determines the classification of your product. It determines everything. So if you want to know if I have a significant change or a minor change, you have to go back. Does it change my intended use? A significant change is a significant change is a significant change if it changes the intended use and it changes the risk profile. If it changes the risk profile in a negative way. So then it's a significant change and you have to do a lot more documentation with verification and validation. So, and you'll find some decision trees which say that if I have a software change, then it's automatically a significant change. Yes, if you're just looking at changing the color on the screen or changing a font on the screen, that could still be significant if the issue has been that the user can't read it correctly. So we can have very small changes can have a very big impact. And that's why we build in risk management. So we have these, we can say methodologies that we apply. We have design and development, which I just talked through. Then we have the risk management methodology. Now, risk management has got very complicated with AI coming into the story. So with risk management, I have risk management of my device or of my product. And then I have risk management of software. Now, people don't get killed by software, but they get killed by the results of software. So what does that mean? Software generates hazards. And these hazards could lead to a harm. And the same with AI. A failure of an AI system can generate hazards, and these hazards could lead to harm. Now, the challenge is that the scoring system for software hazards and for AI hazards is different to the scoring system for device hazards. And then, just to put a mix in the whole thing, we have cyber security and cyber vulnerability. So
Right.
that has another scoring system as well. And that's why you have a thing called a risk management plan, because it can harmonize these scoring systems to say a significant hazard in software means this in our general picture of risk evaluation and assessment. But basically, coming back to your original question, yes, the intended use is the single most important document. And the second most important document for me is the trace matrix. The matrix that connects all outputs and all evidence with all inputs. And those two from those two documents, you can look at them and say this is where a product is. You can very quickly tell where you are with a product.
Right. And I think you also told me about something called the document plan.
Yes, you can have a document plan, which is basically So if we look at, there's the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, and there in pharmaceutical world we have the Common Technical Document. So the International Medical Device Regulators Forum called created a set of documents called a Standard Technical Documentation, and the pharmaceutical world has a Common Technical Documentation. And these are basically lists of documents that you should have. So when you submit your product in Europe, you will need a subset of those documents. And when you submit a set of products, a submission, say, for instance, in the US, it will be a slightly different set. But if you use if you create the full set of documentation, unless you're going for one market, if you're going for a global market or multiple markets, my recommendation is create the full set of documentation, because then you can go anywhere in the world with your product. And it
Right.
might not always be you. It may be you sell your product or license your product to another company, and they need those documents to present that product in another jurisdiction.
Right, right, right. And out of all of this, this entire workflow, where do you think the most hours go in on like a typical project? Is it with researching? Is it with writing, reviewing? What is it?
So basically, when I'm working on a document set, I'm looking it when we talk about document or submission remediation, you have to visit every single document. And you have to basically, we can say rewrite every single document because they all have to connect. So often the content is there, it's just not being communicated in the right way. Sometimes there's documents missing or content is missing, but most of the time the content is there. The documents just have to be put together correctly and everything has to be formulated correctly. So when we talk about a remediation, a classical, fairly standard medical device, you need to be looking at, we can say anything, we can say, depending on where they are in the process and what's happened, you should be talking about to create a full set of documentation from zero for a medical device. You should be looking at between 1,000 and 1,500 hours of work. Um, and I mean, you will AI speed that up? I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether it speeds that up. You're still having to create the core documentation. You're still having to go through every text block. You're going to have to write stuff. What AI will for sure do is it will make your work more thorough. It will help you be more thorough in your work, that's for sure. Even when you think you're super thorough, it can help you be more thorough. So,
So it doesn't reduce the time that it takes to do a certain task.
in my experience so far, no, it doesn't reduce the time. In my experience, when I look at a project, I usually look at where are they in the project, and you can say there is no project under 500 hours. So if a company has they've created a product, but they're still trying to sort out documentation, you're going to have to think about 500 hours to line that all up. And I've done enough of these to see it always comes out that way. But really, we can say there's between 500 and 2,000 hours. If you're doing a product from absolute zero and you need to create all the documentation best practice, you've got to be looking at, if it's a very simple product like a syringe, a pre-filled syringe, then maybe you're talking about 1,000 hours for the device technical file, maybe a little bit less. But you have a lot of information in there. You have to think about the biocompatibility of the syringe. You have to think about the stability documentation. There's a lot of documentation even for the simplest product. So I deliver it in a sterile package. Where's your sterile integrity testing, for example? Where's your shelf life testing? So it's really yeah, I would always say, yes, maybe you can cut it a little bit shorter, but I would say from the simplest product, we're talking about around about 1,000 hours up to 2,000 hours, and that's if I'm doing it. Other people might take longer. People can easily take longer. It's a lot of work.
Oh, wow. 1,000 hours for just like the just one product.
But think about it: 1,000 hours to fully document a product is 6 months' work, one person.
Wow.
That's not very much. I don't know of any company that gets a product out the door in 6 months. Yeah, it sounds like a lot. It sounds like a big number, but actually, I can tell you it's a big number when a company is waiting to go to market and they've had their submission rejected. And then it's like, oh, it's going to take us another 6 months. Well, yes, maybe. That's how it works.
You just have to keep iterating at it, I think. That's the one thing that I've
Yes.
learned till now, that you just need to, continuously iterate on this. I think I recently spoke to a research scientist from Lupin, and they sort of had a team of 50 to 60 people, just the compliance team. Uh, and I mean, it's natural that they have junior regulatory affairs guys. So, what do you think? Where can a junior guy safely use AI, which is like that one document that can be, safely outsourced to, let's say, Claude or any other AI?